The Boy Who Reversed Himself by William Sleator, 22. Every point in a dimension n is accessible from and vulnerable to the dimension n plus 1. That's the universal law of dimensions, and the reason why all the guardians are necessary, from the guardians of 1 space, 2 space, 3 space, 4 space, all the way up to the guardians of infinity minus 1 equals space. Infinite dimensional space, sometimes known as Hilbert space, is the only exception. You don't need any guardians all the way up there. That's because there isn't anybody they need to be guarded from. They're the very top of the pile. Meanwhile, down here at the bottom, Omar started toward me as if to push me away from the glittering thing to cover my eyes, but an instant later he realized that it was, as I had said, too late. He slumped down onto his knees and put his hands over his own eyes as I gazed at the two-space universe. "No wonder Mr. Campanelli is so afraid of the Highway Commission," I murmured. Two-space was big, and it wasn't a flat plane. It seemed to be a bubble. We weren't really in a basement, but in a cave that extended into dimness. As far as I could see, the only light came from the gleaming shape, like some huge dirigible that curved away into the distance. The two-space universe was the flat surface of this balloon, just as our universe is the three-dimensional surface of a four-space hypershape. I could clearly see the creatures moving around on the balloon, the living paper dolls, though they didn't look like any paper dolls I had ever imagined. They didn't stare up from the surface like paper dolls, but they weren't exactly profiles either. When they wanted to change direction or look the other way, they couldn't turn around in 3 dimensions as we do. Instead, they had to turn over on the flat surface. That made their anatomy, from my point of view, very peculiar indeed. The basic shape of their bodies was something like a fat capital B. They had 2 limbs coming out of the top of the B and 2 limbs coming out of the bottom. To my surprise, they also had 2 eyes, each one at the edge of one of the rounded parts of the B. The indentation between the eyes was the mouth. When they wanted to change direction or look the other way, they bent over the middle, sort of like a person doing a cartwheel, so that the top limbs became the bottom limbs and vice versa. When the limbs were on the bottom, they functioned as legs and feet, and when they were on the top, they functioned as arms and hands. Actually, they only looked like bees when they were moving from left to right. When they moved from right to left, they looked like backwards bees. Sometimes, when something was puzzling me, and since Omar was standing beside me now, I asked him about it. "But Omar, they're not like the profile you showed me with the big nose pointing one way. So if I flipped one of them over in 3 space, how would the others know he was reversed?" "No, Laura, don't do it," he cried, reaching for my hands. "Come on, Omar, I wouldn't do that," I promised, shaking him off. "But how would they notice if one of them got reversed?" He was shaken and upset that I had discovered the existence of 2 space, but that didn't mean he wasn't glad to show off his superior knowledge. "First of all, did anybody instantly notice when I was reversed? Or when you were?" he asked me. "Did your mother even notice?" "Oh, that's right, I guess they didn't." "All right, but on the other hand, these people would notice. Take a closer look. Can't you see the nose and the ear?" I studied them more carefully. I saw that the flat side of the B wasn't really flat. There was a little triangular bump opposite one of the eyes and a little round bump opposite the other eye. When they're going from left to right, the nose is on the top and the ear is on the bottom, Omar said. And when they're going from right to left, the nose is on the bottom and the ear is on the top. So if one of them did get flipped over in 3 space, the nose and the ear would be reversed, just like with Gigi and Ramoon. He would seem like some kind of horrible, unnatural monster to the others. They would do terrible things to him. That's exactly the kind of thing we're here to prevent." "What do you mean, we?" He sighed. "Look around the edges, Laura." I looked, and I saw people, like Omar, moving around the periphery of the gleaming bubble, some below it, some on catwalks above it, people patrolling it just as I had seen the Guardians patrolling the 4-space lake that was our universe. "Guardians," I breathed. Omar nodded. "Other Guardians, like me," he said. "You're a Guardian, Omar?" "Well, an apprentice," he admitted. I came here to learn and to replace Mr. Campanelli when he gets too old. So that's what all your duties were and why you never let me in here, I said. And at that moment, I began to understand the universal law of dimensions I quoted at the beginning of this chapter, and part of what it implies. But I still didn't understand everything. 2 space is vulnerable to 3 space, just as 3 space is vulnerable to 4 space, I said. So you're protecting them from other 3 space people, and the 4 space guardians are protecting us from other 4 space people. Now do you see why it has to be a secret? Why it's so important to preserve ignorance, Omar said. What if somebody like Pete found out about 2 space? The guardians are some protection, but not really enough. Pete could sneak past them and cause trouble in 2 space, like Ramum could do in 3 space if he knew where it was. The guardians don't even want you to know about 2 space. But wait a minute, Omar. Okay, so there's a 2 space and a 3 space and a 5 space. But why should it stop there? Why shouldn't there be 6 space, 7 space, 8 space, and every other number of space too? Don't, Laura, Omar said, backing away, sounding scared again. Can't you just leave it at what you already know? Can't you just for once stop prying, stop finding out more than you're supposed to? He was still trying to hide something from me, and that's what gave the whole thing away. There are those other dimensions, Omar, aren't there? I demanded. There's one dimension on top of another, all the way up to wherever it stops, and each one has to be protected from the other one, because each one is vulnerable to the one above it. It's like a balancing act in a circus, or some kind of chain reaction. If the one on the bottom falls down, then all the other ones do too. So we protect 2 space to be sure 4 space protects us, and 4 space protects us to be sure 5 space protects them. She was a guardian too, the 5 space lady, wasn't she? And she protects 4 space to be sure 6 space protects her, and so on, and on and on. Isn't that right, Omar? Stop it, Laura, stop it, he moaned. Don't even say it out loud. Only the guardians are supposed to know. If the rest of the world found out about it, if the structure broke down, then it's too terrible to imagine. But you're the one who gave the whole thing away, Omar, I pointed out. Sure, I made the mistake of going out there with Pete, but I didn't understand much then. You did understand, and you told me anyway. You're the one who betrayed our sacred trust. But I was just so lonely, Laura, he said, touching my arm. I thought it would be the only way you would ever be my friend. I didn't think it would turn out like this. You might have done the same thing. If I knew as much as you did? I don't know, Omar, I said. But you know what? Just because the kids at school were unfriendly to you doesn't automatically mean you're a good person. Please, Laura, don't be so quick to accuse me, he squeezed my hand. You don't know what I had to go through to get them to take you up into 5 space. And you don't seem to realize how unusual it is that they might let you go, that they might let you go on knowing about it. Thanks for doing that, Omar. I returned the pressure of his hand. But she'll be on my side, won't she, the 5 space lady? She trusted me, and it was hard to think of the word right now. It was hard to think of the right word for her. She's big and important. Don't make the mistake of thinking she's like God, Omar warned me. You never saw the 6 space one. Bigger than her. They're all going to have to decide what to do about you. But when, Omar? I said, frightened now, still gripping his hand, soft and moist as it was. It was a lot more comforting than Pete's hand had been. Omar certainly demonstrated that I could trust him. Maybe that was why his hand felt so good. It's going to be soon, Laura. Look, here comes Mr. Campanelli. A figure leaning on a cane was approaching us, a dark silhouette against the radiant bubble of 2 space. All that was years ago. Now I am a neurosurgeon. Not to mention a gastrointestinal surgeon, a cardiovascular surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon, and any other kind of surgeon you might want to name. I perform wonders. I make superficial incisions only to protect my secret. I've saved the lives of people who couldn't be helped any other way. The guardians did decide in my favor. largely because of the testimony of the 5-space lady, whose name in translation is the rough equivalent of Grace, but my knowledge and continued access to 4-space were allowed only if I agreed to certain specific conditions. And in fact, despite my initial doubts, Omar had turned out to be as satisfactory a husband as anyone could wish. We are quite devoted to each other. Each of us is committed to a demanding career, and we often do not see one another for days at a time, but that only makes the time we have together all the more special. He is as fascinated to hear about what goes on inside my patients as I am to learn about the latest developments in 2-space. The secret and the responsibility that we share only strengthens our bond from year to year, and I would also like to say that although Omar is still shorter than I, he did turn out to be an attractive enough adult in an exotic sort of way. In my opinion, anyway. Getting his tooth replaced helped a lot. We are very happy. As for Pete, he managed to make me as unpopular as Omar. The stories he told about the weird drugs I gave him didn't damage my reputation. It was what he said about how cold and unapproachable and just plain peculiar I was that did the trick. But being an outsider didn't bother me as much as I might have expected. More than anything else, I was relieved that my plan had worked, and Pete's ignorance and life were preserved. Not being popular was a trivial sacrifice to make, considering the larger issues at stake, and those issues are very large indeed. The balance between the dimensions turns out to be a great deal more delicate than I realized at first. One way to think of it is to imagine a series of balls balanced on top of one another, each one larger than the one supporting it, and the one at the bottom holding up all the rest, the smallest of them all. Only one little nudge, especially down here in the lower dimensions, would upset the entire pile. The result would be a cataclysm so total that one can barely begin to comprehend it. My parents, of course, are thrilled to have Omar and me living right next door to them in the house that used to belong to old Mr. Campanelli. We visit them often enough to compensate for the fact that because of Omar's top-secret government work, they believe, they can never enter our house, and they dote on Omar Jr., who is already being prepared to take over his father's business. When I glance in the mirror these days, I note without regret the touches of gray in my closely cropped hair, the tiny lines beginning to form at the edges of my lips and eyes. My life has turned out to be so spectacularly rewarding that even now, at times, I am amazed by my good friends. Along with everything else, it is endlessly fascinating to continue to learn more about the various dimensions. For instance, why is 4-space so primitive? Like the world in some of our ancient folk tales. Advanced technology, it seems, only develops in the uneven dimensions. It amuses me to no end to try to imagine what the advanced technology of one-dimensional space might be like. About the only thing bothering me at the moment, in fact, is the dogged persistence of the State Highway Commission, which has still not given up the ridiculous notion of tearing down this block to build an interchange. Mr. Campanelli fought them for years, and we are continuing to fight. Unfortunately, we are now the only family still holding out against them, which weakens our position considerably. We cannot, of course, divulge our secret to the federal government, as crucial as that secret is to the security of the planet. Politicians would certainly wreak havoc upon the dimensional balance if they ever found out about it. The only solution now is the drastic one of appealing for intervention from the higher dimensional guardians. Omar must do it soon. I have reason to suspect that the State Highway Commission is on the verge of resorting to unscrupulous, if not illegal, tactics. And now the time has come for me to destroy this notebook. I have written this account not to preserve it on paper, but only to engrave these events in my own memory. It is the one secret I have kept from Omar. If he knew of its existence, he would be appalled, justifiably, at the risk I have taken in writing it. What would happen if it ever fell into the hands of a publisher? I shudder to think. And that is the end of The Boy Who Reversed Himself. I would love to read more William Sleator very soon. If you liked this, suggest a William Sleator book. I remember them all being pretty good. I don't know that I've read every single one of them, but I sure loved them when I was younger. You Over the Garden Wall fans will note that the 4-space Guardian and the Woodcutter both sang, the Father's Song from, Engelbert Humperdinck's Hansel and Gretel, which I did not realize until reading this book. But if you haven't seen Over the Garden Wall, you should definitely check it out. It's great. Holidays are coming. I have 2 requested books coming up, lots of short stories. I am excited to see you in the next video.